Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari, sidecoach for the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport of Detroit Bad Boys, The Pin Down. So if you guys need more Detroit Pistons basketball, which you absolutely do, him and Blake Silverman do a great job over on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel with The Pin Down. So check them out Wednesday, Thursday nights going live. You can get over there and interact with them. Omari. Well, first, Harry says, what up, though? What's up, Harry? Appreciate you joining us this morning. We have Detroit Pistons basketball, like real somewhat meaningful basketball happened last night. I think we're going to talk about it like it's meaningful because honestly, I just want to. Like, I don't want to give the caveat every 30 seconds. Well, I know it was a preseason game and it was just a preseason game and Giannis didn't play and Chris didn't play. And, you know, unfortunately for the Bucks, I think the worst thing that came out of that game for them was not Malik Beasley. They could have used Malik Beasley, but Gary Trent Jr.'s elbow injury, hyperextension, and then their young guys just not looking good. But I don't know. I came away and I enjoyed watching that game last night. So we'll get into all of this. Where are you after covering your first game of the season?
Yeah, it's funny because in my story, you always give the caveat, it's preseason. But the reality is that they were down 17, 3 minutes in. And, we've seen them come out of the gate cold a lot, last season and even before. Maybe not that cold. Like giving up a 23 run in the first 4 or 5 minutes is...
Oh, real quick. So I was late, Omari, and one of the first tweets I saw whenever I opened Twitter was, same old Pistons. Yeah. And then once I actually watched the game, I saw why, because of the turnovers and the slow start. So sorry, real quick.
No, it was funny. Like, everybody on Twitter is like, just picking up where you left off from last season. I think it was Ron Holland that was like, so you're just going to retweet your same tweets from December, essentially. But they had a timeout, like, 2.5, 3 minutes in. But it really wasn't until the substitutions that the energy changed. And once they did that, they looked like a competent, energized, and organized basketball team, which we have not seen that much, especially over the last year. So I would say as far as just checking those boxes you want to check to your first preseason game, they absolutely did that and that's all.
Yeah, so Matthew Harrison, I think this is how I feel, Matthew. He said, obviously it is just one preseason game, but it gave me a strange feeling, ... hope. I think, ? Yeah, I mean, listen, it looked good. And we're going to talk about all of the individual players. And, I came on and Wes had put a really nice outline together with some other things just in case. And I told Wes, I'm like, I think we may have enough stuff just from last night's game. So we will see. So obviously a 120-87 win. Let's start the team in general, Omari. What was your first thought? Just offense, defense, we can talk rotations, whatever, without getting into specifically how Cade played or J.I. played or Malik or Ron or anybody like that. What was just your general thoughts about what we saw in the game last night?
Yeah, the big takeaway, I think, is defense. Going back to that poor start that they had where, you tightened up and you rally and, narrow that lead, I think, by 11 by the end of the half. And then from that point on, they won every single quarter. But they won the second 32-19, the third 31-21, and then the fourth they just completely demolished them 29-8. And a lot of that was defense. You look at Milwaukee, I think they turned the ball over 24 times. They shot 34.9% overall. And this is after the hot start. They were making everything at the beginning of the game. I think they hit 7 of their first 8 shots and like 6 of their first 7 threes. Like Dame had 3 of those threes and Brook Lopez had a couple and they couldn't miss. And like, especially I would say from maybe midway through the second quarter on, they just truly locked down defensively. You saw Ron Holland, you saw Cade Cunningham, you saw a lot of different guys coming in there and, just doing what they could to create havoc. And Milwaukee struggled with that. And like, again, they didn't have Giannis, this and that, but it was just more so, the fact that it seemed like the Pistons could smell blood, right? They were like, okay, like we can like physically, overpower this team to an extent. And that's what we're going to do. And that's what they ended up doing. Like, again, you win the fourth quarter by 21 points and you turn what was going to be an 18-point blowout at one point into a 30-point blowout. And that was mostly defense. Like, to me, that game was like 70% what they did on defense. And the Pistons talk about wanting to be a great defensive team every single year. All teams do. But I'm trying to think of the last time I saw an effort like that during preseason, the first preseason game at that. And it certainly seemed like they're playing with a degree of organization and just want to that we haven't always seen. So one game again, obviously, but that's what you want to see from a team defensively in their first game.
So Bump says, great to have you guys on early again. I'll check it out after I watch the game. Yeah, like I say, just with the way schedules are right now, we're having to do these early mornings. We'll see if it changes a little bit once my football season's over. Also, just real quick shout out. My wife and I had our 11th anniversary on Saturday. So shout out Ranny for that.
Big congrats to y'all.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We actually had a date night. We went out with our good friends and we went over to a nearby city, 25 minutes and miles away.
A nearby city.
Yeah. As Wes and I talked about that earlier that day, and then, had a nice meal. And then yesterday was my dad's birthday. So shout out my dad. Yeah. The defense stood out to me as well, Omari. I think one thing that really jumped off the screen was the multiple efforts in that game, whether it was on the boards, whether it was rotations, things like that. There was a perfect example late in the third quarter, even when you had guys like Wendell Moore and Paul Reed in. I think if people will probably remember this, Wendell Moore had like a 3-on-1 defensive transition situation. He jumps and he deflects the lob attempt, and then he makes the second jump and blocks the next shot attempt from behind. So multiple efforts there. And then it was the next possession in transition. Paul Reed sprints back on defense and blocks what I believe was a 3-point attempt. And then like 3 or 4 minutes later, maybe start of the fourth quarter, he gets another one. So there was a lot of those. I thought the off-ball rotations were really good. There was so many examples of guys rotating off the ball, making those X outs. Cade being one of them. Again, I don't want to get too much into individuals just yet, but I thought his activity was good. I really want to talk about Malik Beasley with this once we get to him. And then even on the boards, multiple efforts, people bringing up Ron Holland. We'll talk about Ron specifically, but I thought he was an impact on this end as well. I'm with you, Omari. I thought coming into the season, and again, I'm not going to do it was a 1-game caveat multiple times. We've thrown out that caveat. If you joined us late, the caveat is there, 1 preseason game. But I was nervous that this defense still would be bottom 5. Last night gave me some hope it could be better than that we could see real improvement just based on effort and scheme and kind of understanding where rotations are.
And it was a lot of it is just effort and want to as well, right? Like you mentioned, Paul Reed, he didn't even check into the game for the first time until the third quarter, and he finishes with 4 steals and 2 blocks, and he's everywhere. And we've talked about Paul Reed a little bit, but I've said to me he's a guy that is probably a bit overqualified to just be the third big, given that he played all 82 games for a contender last season behind Joel Embiid. But again, like it's just not fire. And you can even talk about Ron Holland. Like he came in and he's just in all the right spots. Like he's pestering people. He's making plays in transition. He's everywhere. And that's just want to. Like again, like Ron Holland's a rookie. Like he has everything to prove. He comes in and he's scoring in transition, and like he had that play on DeLon Wright where he just completely locked him up, backed him back to the half-court line, and then got the steal and finish toward the end of the second quarter. Like that's just want to, like that's just want to effort and, understanding what this team's identity needs to be. And yeah, again, I mean, we're going to say this a lot, but I thought that was probably one of the more encouraging defensive games I've seen from this team in a while. And I don't know if they had, outside of the first 3 games last season, I don't know if they had a game like that, from the next 79 games are.
Like, I truly want to go back and watch the preseason games from last year to see what I guess I have notes. I could just go read my notes just to see what the vibes were after that. If I'm overstating kind of just what this looked like. So like, that's the thing is, I just thought things looked a certain way. Let's go to the other end of the floor on offense. Very few turnovers, 12 in the game after a slow start, right? I think there was 2 or 3 to start the game. And that's whenever those tweets were really going. What did you just think about the flow? Because I have some specific things I want to talk about, but just big picture of what the offense looked like. Obviously the floor spacing, but again, without getting into the specifics of how Jaden Ivey was used or how Jalen Duren was used or anything like that. What did you just think of how the offense looked in general last night?
Yeah, so like on defense, the offense had a really rough start. They had 2 turnovers and like out of their first 5 possessions, I think they turned the ball over twice, and then they only made one of their next 3 shots, which was a open 3 by J.I. like 5 seconds into the game. So they really came out of the gate discombobulated and a bit slow, but sort of along the same theme. They caught that early timeout, and then they came back out, and they just completely cleaned up. I mean, the ball movement, I thought, became good by the end of the first quarter. And I would say the ball movement eventually became great by the second quarter. And then it pretty much stayed there the rest of the game. You mentioned turnovers, and they had 12 turnovers, which, I think is a final result that most coaches would be pretty okay with at the end of the night. But in the second half, just to illustrate the point, they had it was like 6-6, right? So you have like 2 or 3 in the first, and sometimes last season they would completely spiral and just wouldn't be able to get back under control. But they were pretty under control for this game. I thought all the way through. You end up finishing with 31 assists, and I thought it was interesting that they've talked about everybody having a role handling the ball, and you had multiple guys with at least 4 assists. Duran, Cade, Ron Holland had 5. And then Sasser came in, like Paul Reed, another guy that didn't play until the third quarter, I'm sorry. And he had 9 assists. So, I think you had guys come in and understand what they needed to do, just to keep things flowing when Cade wasn't in the game. And that also helped as well. And, and then they also knocked down some shots. So I think they had a great night from 3, but you're 22 of 26 at the line. Like, again, small stuff. There would be games last season where they would be shooting like 55% at the line. It's like, it's a 5-point loss. Like, that's the game right there.
What was the 3-point makes and attempts?
Yeah, so they had 12 makes, 37 attempts. So that's 32.4%. So that was...
Okay, so...
Yeah.
I was just curious. So last year they averaged 11 makes on 32 attempts. So you see just a little bit of an uptick just in the attempts right there. Not even necessarily in the makes, right? I mean, the makes were a little bit more because more attempts, but not necessarily in the percentages.
Yeah.
Last year, they averaged 15 turnovers a game. I looked real quick. I think they had just over 10 games last year, obviously all regular season now, but where they had as many that had more than 31 assists. So, just a lot of that. I think YouTube user brings up less straight pick and roll all the time, more off-ball movement. So I think, a couple things I noticed. I thought you mentioned the flow, the movement. I thought the ball moved side to side in one action into the next. And I think what that'll do, Omari, we saw the floor spacing, right? We saw what Malik Beasley could bring, even the gravity of a Tim Hardaway Jr., even though he didn't make shots. I think when people are moving like that, the defense is just more likely to not be in a help situation. Even if you're guarding a non-shooter like Ron Holland or eventually a Sar Thompson, if they're setting a screen and cutting and moving and then dribbling into a DHO and all of that, that defender is going to stay more locked in on their man as opposed to just settling in the lane and being able to stand there. So I just think that natural movement is going to help the spacing. If people want to see a really good example, 9:15 in the fourth, they get a downhill drive. I believe it was from Sasser. And then on the weak side, there's actual action happening. Paul Reed steps in, sets a weak side flare for Wendell Moore Jr. to go to the corner, and Sasser hits him. Wendell Moore Jr. hits the corner 3. It's just all of Omari. How many backdoor cuts did they hit last night? I mean, how often do we see that last year with this team? I feel like every big had at least one assist where they hit somebody going backdoor. That off-ball action and the emphasis on that movement, it stood out to me at least. I thought that looked really good. And to me, it's more impressive that it was in the first preseason game because this is a new coaching staff that's only had one offseason and a training camp so far to kind of put this stuff together.
No, exactly. And everybody looked for those passes consistently too. And that's what I noticed. It was always, guys keeping their heads up, knowing where players are supposed to be. If they weren't there, you kick the ball out, rescreen, whatever. But there was consistent understanding that in order for them to score and generate those looks, like those are the things you have to do. Like you have to set those off-ball screens. You have to keep your head up. I thought it was notable that a lot of their best scorers didn't even really have like great games. Like, Tobias didn't play. He had a mild illness, and JB did say that it was, not serious and that he'll start when he comes back, which, may happen on Tuesday. But Simone Fontecchio was only 3 for 8, 1 for 4 from 3. Tim Hardaway 1 for 7. Cade. What
was Cade's stat line? Like I came away with Cade like, yeah, I thought he played fine, but I didn't think it was. But I don't think things were being forced to him. What did he end up like? How many attempts did he even take? What was his stat line, minutes and everything?
Yeah, 24 minutes. He was 5 for 13, which is 38.5%, 2-6 from 3. Got to the line once. He had 4 assists, 2 turnovers, like 13 points. So, overall, like not.
Okay, so he took more shots than I thought.
Yeah,
but.
like he did take some shots and he was pretty engaged, but it wasn't like, the game you want from like a Cade Cunningham. But other guys stepped up, again, like the bench, was really efficient. Like Wendell Moore Jr. came in, like he was 5 of 6 in 17 minutes. Like a lot of guys came in and just found their spots on the floor and knocked those shots down. So if you have a game where Tobias hasn't played, Fontecchio, Cade don't have great games, and you still come out and shoot, 46% with good ball movement, then that's like to be more of a system win than this player led us. And that's the most encouraging thing about this game. It's just that they shared the load all the way across. They weren't looking at, certain players to bail them out. It was just, we're going to keep, setting these screens, moving the ball, trust our shooters to knock down shots. And they did that pretty much for 48 minutes and it worked out.
Yeah, just Football Academy in Australia says, first game where it didn't look like this team was relying on one or two players. It seemed to run organically. Players chimed in was right. Game came to them. I think that's right. I think it just flowed pretty nice. I have a couple more things team-wise, and then we can get into individual players after the break. One thing I noticed in secondary transition, I liked what they did. So, I just highlighted a few. Cade has the ball, gets a ball screen from Tim Hardaway Jr., early secondary transition. Cade pass and follow to Ivy. I think Ivy actually kept and then attacked middle. Cade gets a go screen from Malik Beasley. Cade attacks and then dribbles back out of the lane right into DHO with Ivy. I think Ivy got downhill, got to the free throw line. And then, then it flipped a little bit. Ivy brought the ball down the floor and Cade set a screen for him. So a lot of these were happening on empty side actions on the wing, but as secondary transition. So not just true get out and run super fast, but flowing right into offense and getting an interesting action going right away. So I like those. I have to ask, I'm sure people want to hear, we saw a starting lineup of Cade, Ivy, Tim Hardaway Jr., Fontecchio, Duren. You just mentioned Tobias Harris wasn't available for this game. Is it as simple? I know it's probably not decided right now, but is the vibe, hey, that was probably Tim Hardaway Jr. starting in Harris's spot, and when Harris is healthy, we'll see the starting lineup that we have kind of predicted on this podcast?
Yeah, that was the vibe I got for sure, that, Tobias would probably step in for Tim Hardaway Jr., and then you got Tobias at the 4, and, Fontecchio at the 3. They were a bit small in the starting lineup, I thought, last night, with Fontecchio in at the 4 and Tim Hardaway in essentially at the 3. But, I will throw out that Tim Hardaway didn't start the second half. JB went with Ron Holland when Ron Holland came in and really changed the game. So, yeah, my assumption is that we'll see Tobias replace Tim Hardaway Jr., assuming that they stick with the same, starting unit as a whole, and that they want to prioritize that once he gets back on Tuesday. Or whenever he gets back. I don't know if he comes back Tuesday or not, but whether that's Tuesday or Friday or whatever game he's back for.
And then just some quick, rotation types things. Beasley came in pretty quick for Ivy. I thought that was interesting. Just 4 minutes. Ivy subbed out, Beasley subbed in. Whenever Holland came in for Fontecchio, it was paired with Stu, at least on the initial substitution. So Duren and Fontecchio went out. Holland and Stu came in. But then Ivy came back in the first quarter with Cade still in. But it was interesting. Like you could see, I felt like there was an effort. And this is a little bit easier with the SAR out. I'm not saying that's a good thing that's a SAR out. Don't mince words here. But with the SAR out, it was a little bit easier to keep that floor spacing. And then, so confirming here, Wes and Omari, both you confirm for me. I do think with it being a preseason game, they only played 8 guys in the first half. Like that was interesting to me. We've talked about, often we talk about 10-man rotations and 5 in, 5 out type stuff. It's possible maybe we do see that 9-man rotation we've discussed where you put Harris into the starting lineup. What happens? Obviously, Asar wasn't available either, but I thought it was interesting that they only played 8. That's not something we're used to seeing, Omari, over the last few years from Dwayne Casey or last season from Monty Williams.
And I remember JB leaning more toward those shorter rotations. I know whenever, they would play Cleveland over the past couple of seasons, a lot of times you wouldn't see more than 8 or 9 Cavaliers check in unless it was a blowout. So we'll see if that sticks. I mean, they didn't have a star, obviously, though. Yeah. Tobias, there are some guys who are going to be rotation players that were not available. And, maybe that forces JB's hand to an extent. But yeah, only 8 players in the first half. And I don't think a knife checked in until Sasser checked in midway through the third. So to me, the first half, if I had to take a stab at what this rotation would look like in the regular season, the first half would have been pretty close to that, and just add Tobias making a 9-man rotation. And to me, that's a pretty set, steady unit.
All right, let's go to break. Whenever we come back, let's get into the individual players. I personally want to start with Jaden Ivey, but if you want to start with Ron Holland or Cade or whoever, I'll let you start it off and we'll go through player by player right after this.
All right, we're back with segment 2, and yeah, we can go ahead and dive right into Jaden Ivey because I thought he was probably, their most impressive player overall, especially on offense. So Ivey finishes with a game-high 22 points, shot 6 for 8 overall, 7 for 9 at the line, knocked down all 3 of his three-pointers, and they were all in the corners, and just looked very controlled, looked very confident, looked like he knew exactly what type of player he is and what he needs to do to impact the game. Bryce, go ahead and lead us off. What's your Jaden Ivey review from last night?
Yeah, so let's stay on the offensive end. Wes, you tweeted about this, so I'm probably going to sound like I'm stealing from some of his tweets. Off-ball actions. They got him in off-ball actions. They got him moving. They created an advantage before he ever touched the ball, and then he attacked. Like the very first one, off-screen curl, gets downhill. They get him with the ball on the move. I mentioned a little bit earlier the secondary transition where Cade probed into the lane, wasn't there, dribbles back out, and then boom, handoff. Ivey gets to the free throw line. My favorite of the night, 10:53 in the third. So we're early in the second half. Cade gets a screen and roll. Ivey lifts on the weak side of the wing, gets just enough of a closeout, and then Ivey is able to attack that, draws the contact, puts a little soft touch off the backboard, gets the and one. I think what we saw from Jaden Ivey is what I always envisioned him capable of. Now, again, we've seen Jaden Ivey be a little bit up and down, especially on the offensive end, right? It looked good because he knocked down 3 threes also. But even if you take those away, let's say he goes 1 of 3. How many points do you have? 22?
Yeah.
So, that's 19. He still has 19 in how many ever minutes he played. And I think the biggest number there is the 9 free throw attempts you mentioned. He was consistently pressuring the paint. At times, it's a little bit out of control. I think we all know those are going to happen. But I thought he was in the role that I think he can be. If he's going to be successful in Detroit, it's in the role we saw last night. Now it's just about sustaining that, him settling into that. And then if the jumper goes, that's just icing on the cake, right? If he's able to knock down the corner threes like he did in that game, that's big time. But I thought offensively what we saw was him being used in the way you would want to see him being used.
Yeah, his life was definitely made a bit easier, where it seems like in the past we've seen him, if he were like purely on ball, just try to probe the defense, look for his own advantages. And to me, he really looked more like a combo guard than a player that the team is going into the season thinking he's going to be like another primary guy. And that's not to say he can't do that, but
I would agree.
But they utilized him more so not like as I want to say like a wide receiver almost, you're just creating motion to get him, space and whatnot. But there was a lot of that. JB's talked a lot about weaponizing Ivey's speed, but with that, JB's also, to an extent, avoided designating that primary ball handler responsibility to any one player outside of Cade Cunningham on its roster. Like obviously Sasser and Ivey will have the ball just from them being guards, but it seems like JB's always had a more holistic approach as far as how he envisions, guys like Ivey working in this offense. And, that's a lot of that is just based around getting him ahead of steam and getting him open shots. So I think the more you can make Jaden Ivey's life easier and get him those easy shots, the better off you'll be. Because with that, you're also going to have those plays like at the end of the first quarter when there's 8.8 seconds on the clock and he just beats Milwaukee's entire defense against the layup with 3.3 seconds left.
Oh, yeah.
5 seconds for Jaden Ivey's like 10 seconds for anybody else. And those are the plays that I think really stand out where it's like, okay, like this guy's speed is different. Like you just don't see players right off the inbound just race up the entire floor in 8 seconds and beat everybody. So really encouraging game from J.I. I think the way that they utilized him was interesting, and it'll be curious to see over the course of the season how that role evolves depending on how he handles it.
Yeah, and I thought we saw some of the hustle things from him as well. I think his third 3 came off his own hustle offensive rebound. Like he went in, attacked an offensive board, came down with it, and then went ahead and took the jumper. Wes mentions it's kind of how Purdue used him, and maybe that's that got him drafted in the top 5, so maybe not a bad I did there. I want to talk about him on the other end of the floor before we move on, because we're going to talk about other guys on the defensive end. So I think it's important that we mention J.I. here as well. He took the Dame matchup to start the game. And if Sasser is not going to be in the starting lineup, which I'm assuming he won't be, if for no other reason other than the health stuff, even if he's ready to play at the start of the year, can't imagine he comes in and starts after everything he's missed thus far. And again, hopefully Sasser is on his path to being healthy and ready to play. But J.I. is going to have to take those matchups. So he took the Dame matchup. It was a little up and down. I will say, I think people will quickly point to Dame's hot start, but not all of those were on Dame. One was on Fontecchio after a true switch, and then the other two looked like just confusion. Like there was one with Cade where it looked like J.I. thought Cade was going to switch, but Cade wasn't, so they were both late. I think the other one was him and somebody else as well. I don't know if it was Fontecchio or maybe it was Tim Hardaway Jr., but it looked like there was a little bit of frustration or confusion on those switches. I thought he struggled a bit with his ball screen navigation, but he has really learned to give those second efforts. So 8:30 in the second quarter, he gets hung up on the ball screen, makes a second effort, and then he gets a block from behind. I think that's where his defense has really improved, is understanding how athletic he is, Omari. And even if he gets hung up on a ball screen or something like that, if he gives another effort, he can get back and be impactful. What did you think of J.I.'s defense last night?
Yeah, no, like I definitely agree with that, just from him taking like the Dame assignment. And I'm not even necessarily looking for Ivy to be like a lockdown defender this season.
No, yeah.
But you're looking for him to take significant steps forward just from like an effort and execution standpoint. And I thought we saw that. You mentioned the screens, and like Ivy, like we, for 2 seasons, we watched him die on screens, right? Like just
die.
Like you could just completely take him out the action pretty early, and then from there, just whatever you're trying to get done on defense collapses, because now they've got advantage after advantage. But yeah, he's making those extra efforts to get over screens, and there's just a general, I think, sense and understanding that not only is he like 6'4", like long wingspan, pretty well built physically, he can overpower a lot of guys, but that's not optional. Like you have to do that to play good defense in the NBA, because teams are gonna pick on you as much as they can if you're easy to pick on. And yeah, like he just has to play with effort and be a guy who can take pressure off of Cade defensively. It's probably going to be a years long journey for most players, including Ivy, to really figure out the defensive end if you don't already come in with that reputation. But yeah, last night, that's all the effort you want to see from a guy in that spot. You want to see him take the big assignments. You want to see him take pride in it. You want to see him make those second, third, fourth efforts. And we saw that a lot last night.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said he doesn't have to be locked down, especially if he's good offensively. He just has to be able to take some of the matchups we're talking about, right? Like you don't want Cade chasing around guys like Dame and Trey and Steph, those type of players. And if Sasser's not in the starting lineup, there's nobody else to do it. So I do think that if he can just take the matchups and not get torched. And I want to emphasize, I don't think it was him necessarily getting torched last night by Dame early. It was more of like the scheme of the defense and looked like confusion that actually tightened up as the game went on. Who do you want to go to next? Jalen Duren is next in my notes, but I know obviously that we haven't talked about the face of the franchise yet. Ron Holland had a very interesting game. Who do you want to go to next?
Yeah, let's talk about Cade really quick. And
okay.
Then, and then we could get to Duren maybe at the end of the segment going into 3.
Yeah.
So we talked about Cade a bit, obviously, like not the most efficient game, but he had some really nice moments defensively too. And I think probably the standout one was toward the end of the second quarter, when Milwaukee's trying to get one last shot off, and, Cade kind of reads the play and immediately puts his hand up, and ended up being a shot clock violation because DeLon just couldn't get a clean shot off. And I thought Cade had a few moments like that where it was just showing that extra level of want to, effort, to like tenacity, like whatever you want to say, and just want to. Like so much of defense with this team is just, you are young, energetic guys. You have to go out there and play physical and just try to overwhelm teams. It's not about having 5 Asar Thompsons. It's about, just making life difficult. And even though Cade didn't have the best offensive game, I thought defensively, this would have ranked among his better games of this for last season.
I agree. I love that you went to the defense. Offensively, there's one thing I want to talk about specifically because we saw him do something that I've always liked about his game on offense, and I'm interested to see if they play into it a little bit more. But yeah, a lot of my notes revolved around his defense. I thought his hand activity was good. He had multiple deflections in the first quarter, just being active. and his engagement overall. The possession you bring up was a really, really good possession from the team in general, but a great rotation from Cade in terms of seeing the rotation, getting there, and then blocking it or, making sure that the shot wasn't able to get off. I loved his activity on the defensive end. And if he is able to be that, right? Like if you have J.I. taking primary matchups and then Holland and Sasser and those guys taking other primary matchups, and Cade can just take on quote unquote the worst offensive player and just be active in that way, I think that's a really good role for him defensively. On the offensive end, I liked seeing some of the ways they used him. We saw them come out of timeouts where J.I. had the ball and now Cade's coming off ball actions. I don't think we saw him just pounding the ball as much as what we saw last year and ball screen out over and over and over. But what I liked was we saw some of the mid-post isolation, Omari, and I liked that for Cade Cunningham. He had the one where he went to the jump hook. He had another one where he spun off the defender and completely lost him. Now, the defender did a good job. I think it was DeLon Wright actually got back and blocked him from behind. But I like that. I want to see 3 or 4 mid-post isolations a game from Cade Cunningham because I think he's either going to score it at an efficient clip or he's going to draw double teams. And then obviously I think we both believe in his ability to pass out of a situation like that.
And it's funny because not a lot, but sporadically we talk about Cade in the post game because it seems like something he could go to a lot, just being 6'6". And whenever he does post up, he looks great doing it. Like that was a part of his game in college. And
yeah,
this whole time, it's like, there's no reason why he shouldn't be posting up smaller guards. Like, this is clearly part of his game. But yeah, we did see him get to that a bit. Like he posted up Gary Trent Jr. early. Hit the half hook. We still have immediately because it's like we don't see Cade hit that many half hooks. Like I don't know if he hit more than 3 of them last season.
He can. I swear it's part of his game.
Yeah, but he can. And then on top of that, sometimes you talk about Cade and there's some matchups where he may not have the speed advantage or this and that. But let's post Cade up more. Like I want to see Cade have at least one post up a night. Especially when you have defensive matchups like Gary Trent or other guys who clearly are just not going to be able to handle that physicality. So again, not the best overall game from Cade, but between that defensively and also the jump hook he hit, it just shows that they're I like that you mentioned him not pounding the ball as much because I was going to mention that. It seems like they're thinking more as a collective 5-man unit and not just, what can individual players do? Because there was just so much, stagnation and ball pounding last season. And it seemed like last night guys understood if you don't have anything there for a couple of seconds, you got to give the ball up and keep moving and try to create something for somebody else, and that included Cade. And yeah, only 5 for 13 shooting, but I thought it was still overall a solid night for him because of everything else.
Yeah, I think for him, I don't have a ton of notes on him compared to J.I., J.D., Ron, even Malik Beasley. I mean, I have some multiple notes on Malik Beasley. I wasn't anticipating that, but I thought it was fine. I really liked what I saw defensively. We'll talk about efficiency and all that as things go on. Wes, we're not going there. Wes dropped a comment that I'm not saying it on the pod.
Is this the 0.5 offense? LOL.
We're not going here. Listen, fine, let's do it. This is exactly what I thought we were going to see last year. Literally, I'm watching this game and 6 minutes in, they're getting blasted. And I'm still going, this is the offense I thought we were going to see all last year. And it never happened. And they did it in one offseason and how many ever days of training camp. And in preseason game 1, we saw exactly what I anticipated seeing last year. So
yeah, no, I thought that last night. It was again, the ball movement improved so much in the second quarter. I was just man, they're passing with confidence and with intention and knowing exactly what you're trying to get done, which again, they just seemed so confused all the time last season. And one preseason game, I'm going to try to not say that anymore. It's only one preseason game, but they passed the test as far as proof of concept that
it's still one more game than what we saw all of last year from that kind of offensive flow, Omari.
Yeah, they're 1 for 1, so you still have 4 preseason games left, but that's the tone you want to see. They executed, and that's exactly what they talked about doing during camp. And, so far it seems like they have a much better understanding of how to execute their offense and generate those looks.
Yeah. Can you replicate it, be consistent, and can you do it whenever a defense is more locked in than probably what the Bucks were last night? That's the challenge now, but we've at least seen the foundation of it. Let's talk Jalen Duren. You want to start? I have some notes. I have some positive ones and then a little bit of negative also, but
yeah, the obvious point is that a big part of that, 23 early lead was just that they were, prying on Jalen Duren and I think he still had some of that confusion. You see, look when he's defending ball screens or, even just in drop as far as where to position himself and just how to leverage his size and athleticism really to bother players in that matchup. Again, like this is still a young guy, so the second youngest on the team, but he wasn't quite the defender they needed him to be last night. And I thought the game kind of turned once Isaiah Stewart checked that.
Yeah, so I thought the major concern last night was they were trying to play him at the level against Dame, which you kind of have to do because Dame can do what Dame can do. And then he couldn't stay in front of Dame. So he would play at the level, he'd play higher, and then Dame is able to get around him and attack. Now, in fairness, J.I. has to be better navigating those screens as well, and that plays into it also. I thought that was the major. I thought he had a slow start actually on both ends. Like I actually didn't think his finishing was great to start the game either. Like he had some not lob finishes, but some catches and then tried to finish, and Lopez made it really hard on him. Now, I will say he definitely got better as the game went on. He had an awesome defensive possession late in the second where he had active hands, forced a turnover. He had another one in the third where he got a deflection on a pass. So I do think that was good to see just in terms of his hand activity, because you can make up for a lot of things in ball screen defense as a big. Like Jokic is really good at this. Jokic just puts his hands in the right spots, even though he can't move great, and he takes away passing lanes or gets steals. One underrated thing with Jalen Duren, maybe other people are on this, and this isn't just because of what happened with Gary Trent Jr., he was a great screen setter last night, I thought. Even before that screen, I had already put multiple examples in my notes. Cade's first three-point make, he had a really nice screen. Cade set it up, but Duren kind of moved. That's impactful. That's important as a young big, and I thought it looked really good last night, his screen setting, Omari.
Yeah, I thought his screen setting looked pretty good, and overall his effort, I think, improved once things started clicking on both ends and he came back in. And, you kind of talk about just the advantage of having depth and guys who can come in and set that tone. Duren saw what happened early. He's like, okay, we're down, 23 and they're going to do this and that to make life difficult. He comes back in and, the team's already set this new culture of, being involved in passing lanes and just absolutely getting in guys' face and, this and that. And I thought when Duren came back in, he had a greater level of focus. So, again, just having guys like Stu and Fari behind him, I think will, help kind of light that fire and help him understand, like, this is what I need to do if I'm going to impact this game. It's not just being a lob threat, it's not just rebounding, but, it's being, at the very least, a pest on defense and making, opposing ball handlers think twice about penetrating the lane. So he started a bit slow. I didn't think it was a terrible game for him overall, but, like, absolutely at the beginning of the game, I thought it was clear that he still has some more growth ahead of him, which is fine. Like, it's not a big deal like this early in the camp in preseason. But once they set that tone, I thought he came back in and looked a lot better, which is good.
Yeah, and then I thought, offensively, we saw some of the lobs, offensive rebounds, those things he can do. What I was interested to see, we saw a lot of this talk about initiating offense and, grab and go and all of that. I liked what they had him doing. Like what he did wasn't true grab and go to me. True grab and go is you grab the rebound, you dribble it all the way down the floor and initiate offense. What Duren would do is he'd grab the rebound, take one or two dribbles, and usually gave it up before half court, but it did speed up the break. And I like that. I like that he's able to do that. What was more intriguing was what they were doing with him in the half court, Omari, where he was catching like at the elbow and then they were running the split actions off of him. And he was passing the ball well out of those situations, had multiple good backdoor passes. He had a really, really nice DHO with Holland, where the defender denied it initially. And then so he turned, kind of bumped him with his butt, actually, and then bounced it in front of Holland as Holland curled around him. I thought he looked good operating that stuff in the half court. And I am here for that with Jalen Duren in terms of that type of stuff. So offensively, I did like the role, even though going into the game, I was a little concerned because I'm not here for a bunch of Jalen Duren true, like grab and go all the way type of stuff. But what he did last night was really where I think the sweet spot for him as well.
No doubt. Let's go ahead and go to segment 3. And when we come back, we can finish up the Duren conversation and then talk about the rookie who was also a standout for him. All right, we're back with segment 3. And I did want to add on Duren. He did have 4 assists, 2 turnovers. I didn't think it was like an amazing playmaking night for him, but again, just off your point to close season or segment 2, I think he was involved as a playmaker a good bit. And JB's talked about using Duren in that type of environment. So over the course of the season, I'm curious to see if we see Duren like beyond just doing some stuff out of, the elbow or whatnot. If we actually do see him become more comfortable pushing the ball full court, because he's a guy that's actually going to look for cutters. He's going to look for, shooters on the wing. And if you're on the court with Malik Beasley and Fontecchio and Tim Hardaway and some of those guys, there's no reason why Duren should be able to take the ball up to the half-court line and find one of these guys. I think he has that in his game. And 4 assists last night, but I do want to see how creative they get over the course of the year using him in those playmaking situations.
So Jonathan brings up the Duren versus Stu thing. Jonathan, I think it's an interesting conversation. Amar, I don't think we have time to get into it right now. So Jonathan, appreciate the comment. Appreciate you being in here. I do want to make sure, maybe we'll come back to it if we have time, but I do want to get into Ron and even a few of the other guys. But I wanted to acknowledge the question because I think it probably is something that fans are going to talk about a little bit. And I think we'll have more opportunities as we move forward. Let's talk about Ron Holland. Derek Brown says, I know it's just a first season game, but you can tell Ron Holland be a fan favorite. YouTube user, Ron was a great connective piece. YouTube user, Ron and Sasser still look very similar to me. Omari, Ron Holland, what were your thoughts? First impressions of a not summer league, but an actual somewhat NBA game.
Good. Like he looks like a player who knows exactly who he is and what he needs to do and how to do it. And he came in and like the energy was like immediate. Like he came in, he got an offensive rebound that later led to Malik Beasley 3. I think he was involved in the turnover on the other end. Like he pushed the ball up the court. Beasley gets another 3. He's cutting the lane. He's playing with, defensive fire and intensity. I think I mentioned it earlier, but I think about that possession he had against DeLon Wright, where I think DeLon Wright catches the ball on the right wing. And Ron Holland somehow just flusters him so much he ends up at the half-court line, and then he forces the turnover against the transition layup. And like Ron was just always in the right spots. Like he just seemed like a guy who has a nose for the ball, knows how to leverage his athleticism and, use his body to frustrate other players. He had 5 assists, and the playmaking I thought looked really good, which was interesting because I don't think he looked that sharp as a playmaker during summer league. And obviously he's had, time in between the get more acclimated and whatnot, but that's a really good all-around game. I thought for the rookie in his first real NBA action. And JB said after the game that Ron's a guy you don't have to call plays for. He's just going to come in and make an impact. I've seen some comparisons to Sasser. Ron does not really remind me of Sasser off of last night, just because I feel like Sasser's approach to the game is just so much more distinct. Like I'm just trying a better way to describe that. But I think once we see both players playing, it'll be easier for me to describe why they don't really remind me of each other as much. But to me, Ron looked really comfortable. Like not a great ball handler, but like effective, just knows how to attack space. I was impressed, like for, a game 1 where you have no plays called for you to come in midway through the first, that you and Stu essentially completely changed the energy on defense. Ron was for sure one of their best players last night to help set that tone.
Yeah, so I want to stay on the defensive and kind of hustle part. The very first possession, he gets a hustle offensive rebound. In that possession, I think Cade took a 3, somebody else got another offensive rebound, and then Beasley ended up hitting a 3. But it was very first possession, and he made his presence felt with a play like that. Then on the defensive side, Bobby Portis is going to get an offensive board for the Bucks. And Holland comes in from the 3-point line, tips it away, didn't get a box score stat, but, eventually eliminates the offensive board from Portis. So just immediately making those, he had a great low man rotation early on where he took the charge from Brook Lopez. He took the Dame matchup. Like he may be a little further along defensively than what I thought. I thought he was going to have some growing pains just with like the foundational and the fundamental things, but it did look better.
And to that point, real quick, we talked to Malik Beasley a couple of days ago after practice, and there's a question about Beasley taking, defense more seriously than he has, which he's talked about. And I thought he looked pretty good on defense too. But he mentioned, and I have Ron and Sasser, as well. And I went back and asked him, you said Ron and Sasser, right? Like Sasser, we already know, but Ron hasn't even played an NBA game. We put him in that same category. So to me, that speaks to what Ron's been doing behind the scenes, and we did see some of that. But not to cut you off. I thought it was significant that Malik Beasley said Ron and Sasser. Like immediately, he's like, both of these guys are going to come in and take the load off of us defensively.
I mean, you have way more insight than me, so you should absolutely cut me off anytime you want. So, not like offensively, I will say the biggest thing I was impressed with was how well he moved the ball. You kind of mentioned that he's a ball mover. The ball does not stick in his hands, at least in the half court. I thought a couple times in transition, he over dribbled. I know a YouTube user kind of brought up, the ball handling in general. It looked loose at times, the left hand, all of that. Like, he's got to figure some of that out. There was some rawness in his offensive game. We saw him miss a couple open jumpers, but if he's able to just multiple plays where he catches the ball and then boom, it's out of his hands to the next, he knows where the next pass is. Now, what he's have to be able to do is whenever that gets taken away, can he knock down the catch and shoot? Can he attack the closeout? Mid third quarter, there was a great example where the one more pass wasn't there. He recognized it too late, didn't take the shot, and then it was too late at that point to attack the closeout. And then he tried to go one-on-one for a little bit, and he wasn't able to create. So being able to take advantage of those situations, I think, is where his offensive game has to come. But man, I really liked what I saw from him defensively, the extra efforts. I mean, yeah, good morning, basketball fans. Let's go Pistons, baby, from Matthew Ayers. His rep going back to high school, Omari, was how hard he played. For being a top high school recruit coming out of Duncanville, that's not usually part of the scouting report. It always has been with Ron. And then real quick here from MB Well, how are the Pistons going to work Asar and Ron? They look similar. Like, I just don't think they play together. We've talked about this in terms of, having to the rotations and the minutes. You're just going to have to figure it out. Like, I thought they did a good job of navigating it. I think, you play him with the shooting big. I guess if you do have them together, there are rotations you could make work. Like, you could put enough shooting around them.
Like, if you have Stu, Beasley, and Cade, and Ron can make like one of every 3-point attempts, does that work?
Yeah, I think you could get close enough. And again, I want to go back to something I said at the top. I think the movement of this offense will naturally make spacing better, because it's really easy to guard Asar Thompson if he's just standing in the corner. And so then you just don't guard him, right? Like, where he's at. But if Asar starts in the corner, then comes off a screen, then runs a DHO, then cuts through to the other side, then sets a flare screen, then dives to the lane, and then he's in the dunker, his man is having to follow him in all those situations. He can't just stand there and be ready on the Cade drive. So I think the movement we saw at least last night will help with that naturally, even though it's still not ideal. So I don't anticipate the Pistons be able to play them a ton together, Omari, but I think you could get away with it just a little bit.
And I'm also higher on Ron as a shooter in long term. Like, again,
sure.
I don't know if he's ever going to be like
for sure.
a 40% guy, but I think he's somebody who could knock down threes. The shot's not broken. He's shown that he can hit them. And he's going to get cleaner looks with the Pistons. So he got that should be the G League for sure. I mean, I think even just some of what he did last night was just, you're taking a high energy, high effort player, and you shipped him from being the focal point in the G League to just a complimentary piece. And I was like, now I can just focus on what I like to do. So long term, I am curious to see how the Asar Ron situation plays out. But for me, my focus isn't necessarily on whether they could play together, because at this point, they're both complementary pieces anyway. So, you don't necessarily need them to play together, I don't think, unless you really want to create havoc defensively. But like with that, like, again, like I think Ron's shot, will end up being fine. I don't know if he'll be a knockdown guy, but, if Ron can capably knock down open threes, then you probably can play them together, at least in spurts.
So Wes brings up that my scout on Holland pre-draft was not a great passer, but a willing one. And, felt like maybe that was kind of spot on. And I think I agree with that based on what we saw last night. Very willing, but where he can get into trouble is when those passes last night were kind of standstill catches on the 3-point line and then move to the next guy. Where he struggles is kind of the overall decision making when he's trying to get downhill and make different, more difficult reads of the defense. We got a little bit more time here, Omari. We have some other guys we can go to, some other guys that really impressed. I have one I absolutely want to talk about, but I'll let you go first. Who's a player that we haven't discussed yet that you're like, man, we need to give him a little attention positively or negatively?
Yeah, Malik Beasley, he came in.
Okay,
and,
same guy, same guy.
Like, he was another guy that came in and the energy just shifted. Tim Hardaway, I thought, had a little bit of a rough start, just locating, shots. But Malik Beasley came in and he has some fire to him too. Like, he came in and knocked out a 3, and then
I want why he had a little bit of chip on his shoulder, Omari.
Like, who knows, right?
Who knows why he was a little worked up for that one last night?
Yeah, who knows why when he hit that second three, he turned around like Steph and talked to the Bucks bench before the shot
I didn't
fell.
see it live, but when they showed the replay, I was like, dang, man. Like,
I was like, I think that's like, that might be the first time in Pistons history a guy turned around on a three. But like maybe Blake did it at one point. Like, I don't know. Like if anybody, like I started covering the team in 2020. I wasn't watching the Pistons consistently from like, 16, 17 to like 20. So if anybody can recall somebody in that span doing a Steph turning around three, let me know. But that's the first one I've ever seen from a Piston. And yeah, Beasley came in with some moxie. He hit shots. I thought he played with effort on defense. And he was another guy that really came in and kind of set the tone for what the game needed to look like the rest of the way down.
Yeah, Wes brings up he personally escorted Dame to the bench at one point too. Like they walked with each other. AJ Johnson, who is a very talented young player, he's just like not ready for the NBA, and that was the scout coming into the draft as well. But he like got into AJ Johnson, and I think he ended up dribbling out of bounds or something off of Beasley, and you could see him just like staring him down and talking trash to the rookie. So
and the Pistons really need that energy. They have not had that, and they need that. Yeah, like they really need that.
Yeah, like as a this is where I struggle because like as a high school coach or now with my own son, I'm like, don't act like that. And then I watch an NBA game and I'm like, man, I love that stuff. Like you got to have that on your team. So I got to figure out like where's the transition of letting my own kids kind of become that player because I love it. Listen, we knew the floor spacing, right? We knew it. Like we knew he could shoot. He can get it off quick, man. Like he gets his feet set and he is ready to fire. And that's going to be really valuable. I thought he was good defensively last night, Omari. Like, I thought he was good. And, that was not the rep coming out of last season. There was a lot of, he was bad for the Bucks last year. And I have to, I watched plenty of Bucks games and I didn't think he was like awful, but there's a reason the Bucks didn't bring him back. Like, if they thought he was that good defensively, I assume he'd still be on the team. He made really impactful plays. He was active. I thought he was communicating as much as anybody. I think the very first free throws for the Pistons, the camera zoomed in on him and Cade, and he's talking to Cade about something. So somebody mentioned it earlier in the chat as well, that he was being, communicating in the huddles. I was really intrigued, whether this ends up being a 50-game rental, whether it's the whole year and then he comes back, whatever. That was good. That was very good from Malik Beasley. I think he may have had the game that surprised me the most out of anybody we watched. Like in terms of my expectations, the energy he gave defensively. Yeah, if Beasley plays the Bucks every night, he'll be locked in. And that's what we'll end up seeing. Yeah, we'll play somebody else and it won't be the same. What we saw last night was impressive from Malik Beasley. If they get that from him for 65, 70 games, that's a vast improvement over what they've been getting in that role.
And I also got to mention, he's talked a lot about being an effective defender this season as well. And a lot of guys talk about it. Sometimes you don't believe it until you see it. But we were at a charity event, a community event with Bees back in, I want to say August. And he talked about wanting to be a impact defender then. And then last week in camp, a few times he talked about wanting to be good on defense. And he said a lot of defense is just honestly just wanting to do it, wanting to put that extra effort in. And he talked about some of the things he wants to accomplish on that end, which, if he keeps doing this, I'm going to have to write about it pretty soon. But yeah, like he came in, like he walked the walk, like defense, based on his play last night, is just a want to type of thing and understanding what the defense wants to accomplish. He's actually pretty funny because he was like, I didn't come into the NBA to defend, obviously, but, it's something that he believes he can do. And, he definitely passed the first test last night. Like I thought he was one of their better players on that end.
It was Sharon Dalton that brought it. I actually did go ahead and highlight it. So I'm glad so Sharon Dalton was the one that mentioned. Here's the other sneaky thing with Beasley. Omari, he's 27 right now. He turns 28 in November and on a 1-year contract. Like he's probably pretty motivated to have a good year and get back out on the market in this coming off season and, get another either multi-year deal or something a little bit more. So I think maybe see a pretty good season from him. I have one other player I definitely want to talk about. That's Marcus Sasser. Do you have anybody else before? We probably have time for one, maybe two quick ones. But I want to make sure we talk about Sasser unless you had somebody else wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I think we could close with Sasser because he came in and like Sasser last week said, I want to come in and do more point guard stuff. Like I think, I think he understood what was needed from him. And overall, like not even just the playmaking, but I thought he looked really decisive. And, I think he understood what's required of him within the offense. But I mean, yeah, he had 9 assists, and he there's no way he played more than like 20. Yeah, he played 18 minutes and 37 seconds. And had 9 assists and 2 steals. Like, just great activity. Didn't knock down a 3, but he definitely handled the other aspects of the game that we didn't always see last season, which was good.
Michael says, how the heck did Sasser end up with 9 assists? Eastside Meech, Sasser, Rock Howard, Sasser was awesome. Marcus Sasser was awesome. He was really good. You know, and if that's what he's going to be, I'll have to eat some crow, because I've talked about like being a little concerned how much on the ball, how much creation, those type of things. Last night, he did a really, really good job of it. I thought he looked springy. Like, I don't know if that's the right word to use, but I thought he just had like a pop to his step. And it made me think of what he said at Media Day, right? We talked about this after that Media Day. We talked about on the episode where he mentioned the rookie wall and playing 82 games compared to 32 games and all of that. I just wonder if our last impressions of Sasser from last season really was a small guard in his first year in the NBA, and he was just worn down. I thought he had real juice. Yeah, as Harry says, he dunked last night. Got wide open transition dunk. I liked what I saw. I liked the way he played. I thought he made good reads. I thought he broke down the defense. He got it, sprayed it out to shooters. And then we know he can shoot, Omari, right? Like, we know he can shoot. And so I'm not worried about that. Like, I don't care how many threes he makes or misses in preseason. Seeing him break down the defense off the bounce the way he did last night really stood out to me.
No doubt. And again, if he comes in, then like that's what he's going to do. I also add that we talked to Doc about the Pistons before the game, and he said Ivey and Sasser are 2 guys that really stood out to him and are players that he thinks will be good. Like, a lot of coaches like Sasser. Like, he's like, to me, he's like a coach type of player where, you know, he just does a lot of stuff that you want from that position. You know, I think one thing that's not fair for Sasser is that this is just a tougher era, you know, for players of his size. Like, if this were like 10 years ago, I think we wouldn't even have some of those talks, you know, just because the game wasn't quite where it's at now. But if he's going to come in and be that type of playmaker, and we already know he can shoot and do some other stuff, then he absolutely can carve out a role on this team, because you could always use another shooter and playmaker, and they definitely need that, I think, at the point guard spot this season.
Yeah, 31 team assists, Eastside Meech. Harry says we're going to the playoffs. I think he's just joking with us here, because I know him and he likes to play like that. So I will say this. I don't think my expectations, it would be crazy to change expectations off a single preseason game. They don't change. Like, I thought this team was better constructed. I was excited about improvement and growth and the usage of players and those type of things. I still don't think they're a play-in team, even after what we saw last night. But last night gives me hope that we see the competent, competitive, fun to watch as Pistons fans team that I thought we may see after the offseason they had. And so I'm still holding on to that, which is better than watching last night and not feeling that way, right? Like, at least we didn't watch 37 Cade pick and rolls and defensive effort and wasn't there, and they didn't know when to switch and they couldn't see their rotations. We at least saw the foundation of things that we want to see, and we have to be positive about that. Now, I believe they play Tuesday. We'll see, right? We'll see how that looks. Before our next recording, I think we'll get maybe 3 more preseason games. So we'll have a bigger sample size before our next episode. But so far, so good. One, like you said at the top, 1 for 1, right? From this team in terms of their opportunities to show growth and improvement. And that's all you can ask after one opportunity.
Yeah, that's all you want to see. You know, they're 1 for 1. They passed their first preseason game, I want to say, with flying colors. I don't know that that's about a 48-point swing in their favor. And that's the catch.
Yeah, it was their favor. That's,
you know, it was in their favor, and, you know, and that's good. And, you know, and this is about my last point before we get off, but a lot of guys played well. Like, you look up and down the roster, and almost everybody on the roster, I thought, played at least a pretty good game. And the players who didn't are players that, you know, can play like that more often than not. So we talked about depth a lot this offseason too, and to be this game with Asar out, with Tobias out, definitely spoke to this team having improved depth, which just that competition level, what they've had during camp and preseason, if that carries into the regular season, then it should bode pretty well for them.
Yeah, no, it was fun to watch. I enjoyed it. A lot of really good things. That's a great point. A lot of guys played really well and showed some depth, which was good to see. And we'll see. We'll see what it looks like moving forward as we have more opportunities to evaluate the team before our next recording. If you're here live, thank you so much. Really appreciate all of you, whether on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube. I think this was probably one of our most live viewed episodes at this point. I know it's early on a Monday, at least where I'm at, maybe not for those of you in Michigan, but really appreciate it. And if you're watching, hit a like button, hit a subscribe button, leave a rating, review, whatever, help us continue to grow. And we appreciate it. Amari, take it away.
Yeah, appreciate you guys. 3 games over next week. And with that, I will close us out. So big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, and big thanks to Wes Davenport, as always. And we'll talk to you all next week.